If you had visited the quiet shores of Western Japan many centuries ago, you would have discovered that the sea was never simply water. Every wave carried a memory, every tide returned with another forgotten story. And among all the tales whispered along those shores, none endured longer or more quietly than the story of Hoichi. Even today his name remains one of the most beloved ghost stories in all of Japan. Yet despite its reputation, the story was never remembered because it frightened people. It was remembered because it carried something far more lasting, a quiet sadness. The sea has always shaped the history of Japan. Fishing villages depended upon it. Merchants crossed it. Warriors fought upon it. Families watched loved ones disappear beyond the horizon, never knowing when they would return. For generations, the ocean became a place where history and memory quietly met. Nowhere is that more evident than the narrow waters separating the islands of Honshu and Kyushu. Today, ships pass peacefully through these waters every day. Bridges stretch across the strait. Cities line the coast. Yet more than 800 years ago, these same waters witnessed one of the most important battles in Japanese history, the Battle of Dan no Yura. It marked the final struggle between two powerful clans, the Minamoto and the Terror. For years, the two families had fought for control of Japan. The conflict eventually reached the sea. Hundreds of ships gathered beneath gray skies. Warriors prepared their bows. Drums echoed across the waves. The tide itself became part of the battle. By the end of the day, the Terror clan had fallen. Many warriors chose death rather than capture. Among them, according to history, was the young Emperor Antoku, still only a child. He was carried into the sea by his grandmother, who believed death beneath the waves was kinder than surrender. The battle ended, but the memories remained. Generations passed. Fishing boats continued crossing the same waters. Children played along the beaches. Temples were built overlooking the sea. Yet many believed the spirits of those who had perished never truly left. On quiet nights, fishermen occasionally reported hearing distant drums drifting across calm water. Others spoke of faint voices carried by the evening wind. Sometimes lights appeared far from shore where no boats could be found. Whether these were unusual reflections missed upon the sea or simply imagination, no one could truly say. But the stories continued. Among those who grew up hearing these stories was a blind musician named Hoichi. Very little is known about the historical man himself. Like many figures in folklore history and legends slowly became intertwined, the Hoichi remembered today exists somewhere between both. He lived within a small Buddhist temple overlooking the sea. Though blind from birth, he possessed an extraordinary gift, his voice, and the sound of his biwa. The biwa is a traditional Japanese lute. Its music carries a quiet melancholy unlike almost any other instrument. For centuries, traveling musicians used it to tell great stories. Battles, heroes, lost kingdoms, the passing of seasons. Hoichi became one of the finest among them. People traveled long distances simply to hear him perform. Yet, there was one story above all others that listeners requested: the fall of the Terror. Night after night, Hoichi sang of the great battle, the crashing waves, the banners rising above the ships, the courage of ordinary warriors, the sorrow of families watching everything disappear beneath the sea. Those who listened often found themselves moved to tears. Some believed no living person understood the tragedy so completely. Others quietly wondered perhaps he performed so beautifully because someone else was listening. One warm summer evening after the temple had fallen silent, Hoichi sat alone practicing his instrument. The monks had already retired. Only the sound of waves reached the hillside below. Then he heard footsteps, slow, measured, confident. Someone approached through the temple garden. The footsteps stopped beside him. A deep voice spoke politely. The stranger explained that his master, noble lord, had heard of Hoichi's remarkable talent. The lord wished to hear the story of Dan no Yura performed in full. That very evening, Hoichi accepted without hesitation. The visitor guided him gently through the darkness. They walked farther than Hoichi expected, across quiet paths, past old stone steps. The air gradually changed. The scent of incense drifted through the night. Many people seemed gathered nearby. Though Hoichi could not see them, he heard the faint rustle of fine robes, the quiet movements of many seated guests. Everything felt strangely formal, respectful. The nobleman's voice invited Hoichi to begin. He raised his biwa, and the music quietly filled the night. He sang of proud warriors, of ships colliding upon restless seas, of arrows falling like rain, of the young emperor carried toward the waves. His voice echoed across the darkness. When he finished, silence remained. Then many people quietly wept. The nobleman thanked him warmly. He asked Hoichi to return the following evening, and the evening after that. This continued for many nights. Each time the mysterious visitor arrived after sunset. Each time Hoichi disappeared into the darkness. Each time he returned before dawn. The monks eventually noticed his growing exhaustion. His face became pale. His hands trembled after long nights without sleep. Concerned, they gently asked where he had been going. At first, Hoichi remained silent. He had promised not to reveal his destination. Eventually, his teachers persuaded him to tell the truth. The monks listened carefully. Then their expressions changed. There was no nobleman's residence nearby, no gathering of wealthy guests, no great estate overlooking the sea. Instead, the monks believed they understood exactly where Hoichi had been taken. The spirits of the fallen terror, still gathering beneath the night, still longing to hear the story of their final battle, still unable to leave the world they had lost. The monks feared that if Hoichi continued answering their summons, he would never return at all. Determined to protect him, they prepared a remarkable solution. Before sunset, they carefully covered Hoichi's entire body with sacred Buddhist scriptures. Every arm, every shoulder, every hand, every part of him became hidden beneath holy writing. Their hope was simple. When the spirits arrived, they would no longer see a man, only the sacred words themselves. One instruction remained. Whatever happened, Hoichi must not move. He must not speak. He must remain perfectly still. Night fell once again. The temple grew silent. Soon the familiar footsteps returned. The visitor called Hoichi's name. No answer came. The footsteps moved closer. The mysterious messenger searched carefully through the darkness. Then he spoke again. I see only 2 ears. For a long moment everything remained silent. Finally the footsteps slowly faded into the night. Morning arrived. The monks hurried toward Hoichi. To their great relief, he was alive. Yet one terrible mistake had been made. In their haste, the monks had forgotten to cover one small part of his body. His ears. The messenger, unable to find Hoichi himself, had taken only the 2 ears visible before him. From that day onward, the musician became known as Hoichi the Earless. His story has been told across Japan for centuries, not because people wish to frighten one another, but because it quietly reminds us of something timeless. History is never completely silent. Places remember. The sea remembers. The stories carried across generations continue long after those who lived them are gone. And perhaps on especially quiet evenings, when the tide is calm and distant waves reach gently toward the shore somewhere beneath, the endless waters of Dan Nemuya, an ancient audience, still listens patiently as the soft notes of a lone biwa drift peacefully across the sea. If you had wandered through the gardens of Hoichi Castle after sunset, you may have noticed something unusual. The stone walls stood silent beneath the moon. The pine trees barely stirred in the evening breeze. A single well rested quietly among the shadows. It looked no different from countless other wells scattered across old Japan. Simple, weathered, forgotten by most who passed nearby. Yet for centuries people believed this particular well carried a voice that refused to disappear. Not a cry of anger, nor a shout for revenge. Only the soft, lonely sound of someone counting 1, 2, 3. Their voice continued patiently through the night, reaching 9 before falling into silence once again. Then after a long pause, the counting would begin from the start. This was the story of Okiku, perhaps the most famous ghost in all of Japanese folklore. Unlike many legends, the story of Okiku was never meant to celebrate monsters. It spoke instead of loyalty and justice and promises. that should never have been broken.
The tale first became widely known during Japan's Edo period. Traveling performers carried it from town to town.
Kabuki actors brought it to crowded theaters.
Storytellers retold it beside warm lanterns during quiet evenings.
With each generation, small details changed, yet the heart of the story remained remarkably constant.
Okiku was remembered as a young servant working within the household of a powerful samurai. She was respected for her honesty, trusted by those around her.
Among the many treasures placed under her care, none were more valuable than a collection of 10 ceremonial plates. These plates were far more than beautiful objects. They represented wealth,
honor,
and the reputation of the household itself.
Every plate was carefully counted, carefully protected, carefully returned to its proper place.
Day after day, the routine never changed.
Until one evening everything did.
Different versions of the story explain the events in different ways.
Some tell of a dishonest official who wished to force Okiku into becoming his wife.
Others speak of a cruel master seeking complete control over those who served him. Regardless of the version, the outcome remained tragically similar. One of the 10 plates suddenly disappeared. Whether it had been stolen, hidden, or deliberately removed, no one could say. Okiku searched everywhere.
She counted once, then again.
9 plates, always 9,
never 10.
The accusations soon followed. She had failed in her duty.
Some stories describe repeated questioning.
Others speak of impossible demands.
No matter how carefully she searched, a missing plate never returned.
Eventually, her punishment became unavoidable. In the oldest versions of the legend, Okiku was thrown into the well.
The water below swallowed every sound.
The garden returned to silence.
Life within the household continued. Yet according to those who lived there, the silence never truly lasted.
Night after night, a quiet voice began rising from the depths of the well. Calmly, patiently, it counted. 1 plate, 2 plates, 3 plates. The numbers continued exactly as before.
4, 5, 6,
7, 8,
9.
Then silence. The 10th plate never came. Some storytellers say the voice began weeping. Others describe only a long pause before the counting quietly started again.
For the people who first heard this tale, the sadness mattered more than the ghost itself. Okiku was not searching for revenge. She was searching for something that should never have been lost.
Her duty remained unfinished.
Even after death, as years passed, the well itself became almost as famous as Okiku.
Visitors traveled simply to see the place where the legend was said to have begun. Whether the original well truly belonged to the story became less important than what it represented, a place where memory refused to fade.
Throughout Japan, many castles contain old wells. Most were built for practical reasons,
providing water during long sieges, supporting the daily life of those living within the walls. Yet wells naturally inspired imagination. They disappeared into darkness. Their depth remained uncertain. The surface reflected the sky above while concealing everything below. It is easy to understand why generations imagine such places connecting the ordinary world with something older. Artists often painted Okiku standing quietly beside the well beneath pale moonlight.
Her expression rarely appeared frightening. More often it reflected quiet sorrow. Her long robes moved gently in the evening breeze.
The garden remained perfectly still. Even the moon seemed to pause above the silent water. The atmosphere carried melancholy rather than fear. Kabuki theater eventually transformed the story into one of Japan's greatest dramatic performances.
Audiences gathered to hear the familiar counting. They already knew the ending.
Yet they returned again and again. Not because they wished to be frightened, but because certain stories become timeless. They remind each generation that justice matters, that loyalty deserves respect, and that truth has a way of lingering long after lies have disappeared. Even today, visitors to Hoichi Castle often stop beside Okiku's well. The stone walls remain. The old garden still welcomes quiet footsteps.
The water rests peacefully below.
Most visitors hear nothing at all, only birds singing among the trees, the distant voices of travelers,
the soft movement of wind across the castle grounds.
Yet knowing the story somehow changes the place. The well no longer feels ordinary, it feels remembered. As evening slowly settles across the ancient castle, the final visitors begin making their way home. The garden grows quiet once more. Moonlight touches the worn stones surrounding the old well. A cool breeze passes gently through the pine branches. Everything becomes still. Then far below the surface, almost too softly to hear, a quiet voice begins counting once again.
Not with anger,
not with bitterness, only with the endless patience of someone who has never stopped searching for the missing 10th plate.
If you had walked through the streets of Edo on a warm summer evening, you might have noticed something curious.
As daylight faded, the city did not become quieter. It simply changed. Merchants closed their wooden shutters.
Key houses lit rows of paper lanterns.
The scent of incense drifted gently from nearby temples. Somewhere in the distance, a bell echoed across the rooftops. Life continued long after sunset. Yet among those peaceful evenings, people sometimes spoke of a single lantern that no traveler wished to follow.
Unlike the warm glow outside ordinary homes, this lantern appeared alone,
moving silently through empty streets, sometimes beside a quiet young woman, sometimes disappearing around the corner just as someone tried to catch another glimpse.
Those who followed it were said to discover a story neither entirely about life nor entirely about death.
It became known as the Peony Lantern. Among Japan's oldest ghost stories, few are remembered with as much quiet sadness.
Unlike tales of curses or revenge, the Peony Lantern speaks of love, patience, and the difficulty of letting go. The story first became popular during the Edo period.
At that time, the city of Edo was one of the largest in the world. Its streets remained busy from morning until late into the night. Samurai crossed wooden bridges. Merchants displayed their goods beneath glowing lanterns. Travelers arrived from distant provinces carrying stories from every corner of Japan. As these stories spread, one tale quietly captured the imagination of the city. It told of a young samurai named Shinzaburo.
He lived a peaceful life, neither especially wealthy nor especially famous. His days passed quietly. His evenings were often spent reading or walking through the gardens surrounding his home. One summer evenings, the air grew cool. He noticed a young woman approaching along the road.
She carried a beautiful peony lantern. Its gentle light moved softly through the darkness. Beside her walked an elderly servant. The young woman bowed politely. Shinzaburo returned the greeting.
Their conversation was brief, gentle, respectful.
Yet from that evening onward she returned again, always after sunset, always carrying the same lantern. Night after night the friendship quietly deepened. They spoke beneath moonlit skies, shared peaceful conversations, enjoyed the calmness of warm summer evenings. To Shinzaburo everything seemed perfectly ordinary. He never questioned why she always arrived after darkness had fallen, nor why she always departed before the first light of dawn. Perhaps some mysteries feel too beautiful to disturb. Neighbors eventually began noticing something unusual. Every evening they saw the young samurai speaking alone. No one stood beside him. No lantern illuminated the garden. Concerns slowly spread.
At first they assumed he had become lonely.
Later they feared something altogether different. An elderly priest eventually agreed to investigate.
One evening, hidden among the trees, he quietly watched.
As darkness settled, the young woman appeared once more. The peony lantern glowed softly beside her.
The priest immediately understood what others could not.
The visitor cast no shadow.
Her footsteps made no sound upon the garden stones.
She had not come from the world of the living. The following morning, the priest gently warned Shinzaburo. He explained that the beautiful woman was already dead.
The lantern she carried belonged to another world.
If he continued welcoming her each night, his own life would quietly fade away. Shinzaburo struggled to believe him. How could someone so kind, so gentle possibly be a ghost?
Yet fear slowly entered his heart.
The priest offered protection, sacred prayers, holy charms placed around the house.
Instructions never to answer the door after sunset.
For several nights everything remained quiet. The lantern did not appear. The garden rested peacefully beneath the stars.
Then one evening a familiar voice softly called his name.
It came from beyond the gate,
Gentle, patient,
almost saddened. The peony lantern glowed faintly beyond the trees. Shinzaburō hesitated.
The priest's warning echoed within his thoughts, yet so did every peaceful evening they had spent together. Finally unable to resist, he stepped outside. By morning the garden stood empty. Neighbors found him peacefully seated beneath the old pine tree. His expression remained calm, almost content.
The peony lantern had vanished. Some versions of the story say the lovers were finally reunited. Others simply say the young samurai quietly followed the lantern into the world beyond. No version ends with violence, only silence. The Peony Lantern became one of Japan's greatest ghost stories because it never asks who the villain truly is. The ghost means no harm.
The young man commits no crime.
Love simply refuses to accept the boundary between life and death. There is something deeply human about that. Many Japanese ghost stories share this gentle melancholy.
Rather than terrifying audiences, they quietly ask difficult questions.
How long should grief last? Can love truly disappear?
Do memories ever completely leave us?
The answers remain wonderfully uncertain. Artists painted the peony lantern countless times throughout the Edo period. The lantern itself often became the center of the image, glowing softly against the darkness, its warm light surrounded by deep blue night. Even today, that single lantern remains one of the most recognizable symbols in Japanese ghost folklore. Modern visitors walking through preserved streets in Kyoto, Kanazawa, old districts of Tokyo may still see rows of paper lanterns glowing after sunset. Their warm light reflects gently across quiet stone paths.
The atmosphere feels peaceful, timeless,
almost unchanged. Standing there, it becomes surprisingly easy to imagine another lantern moving slowly through the night. One carrying not fear but the quiet memory of someone who simply wished for one more evening beneath the summer sky.
As midnight approaches, the final tea house closes its doors.
The streets become still. A soft breeze stirs the hanging lanterns outside empty homes. Far ahead, one gentle light continues moving through the darkness.
Unhurried, steady, patient.
For a moment it pauses, as though waiting for someone.
Then without a sound the lantern disappears beyond the next quiet corner, leaving behind only its fading glow and another story carried softly into the peaceful night. If you had wandered through the streets of Edo after midnight, there was one neighborhood where many people instinctively lowered their voices.
Not because anyone had asked them to, but because certain places seemed to remember the stories that had unfolded there.
Paper lanterns swayed gently outside wooden houses.
Rainwater gathered quietly along narrow stone streets.
The city itself appeared peaceful.
Yet among its countless districts, one name continued to echo through generations.
Yotsuya.
For centuries, people believed that somewhere within its quiet streets the memory of one woman had never completely faded.
Her name was Oiwa.
Today she is often called Japan's most famous ghost. Her story has inspired countless plays, books, films, and works of art. Yet the oldest versions were never simply ghost stories. They were stories of betrayal,
of broken trust,
and of promises that carried consequences long after they had been forgotten. The tale became famous during the Edo period, a time when Japan enjoyed relative peace.
Cities expanded.
Merchants prospered.
Kabuki theaters welcomed enormous crowds each evening.
Among all the performances staged across the country, none became more celebrated than Yotsuya Kaiden *. Audiences returned again and again, not because they wished to be frightened, but because they already knew the ending and still hoped it might somehow change. At the heart of the story lived Oiwa, a quiet woman,
kind, patient,
devoted to her husband. Different versions describe her life differently, yet each tells of someone who believed deeply in loyalty.
She expected little: a peaceful home, an honest marriage,
a simple future. Instead, her life gradually became overshadowed by ambition. Her husband, often remembered as Eamon, desired greater wealth, greater status, greater comfort than their ordinary life could offer. Slowly his priorities changed. The promises once exchanged between husband and wife began fading into distant memory. The old storytellers rarely hurried this part of the tale.
They understood something important.
Great tragedies seldom arrive all at once. More often they begin quietly,
with small choices,
tiny acts of selfishness, words left unspoken, trust slowly disappearing one ordinary day at a time. Eventually those choices led to betrayal. Some versions speak of poison.
Others describe deliberate neglect.
Still others simply tell of a woman abandoned when she was needed most. Whatever the details, the ending remained unchanged. Oiwa died, her heart still filled with sorrow rather than hatred. The funeral passed quietly.
Neighbors offered prayers.
Life within Edo continued. The busy streets filled once more. Markets reopened.
Children laughed.
The city moved forward.
Yet according to those who remembered the story, not everyone truly left.
Soon strange things began happening. Paper doors slid open without anyone touching them. Lantern flames flickered though no wind entered the room. Footsteps echoed softly through empty hallways after sunset.
At first people dismissed these events as coincidence.
Old houses naturally creaked. Lanterns sometimes dimmed unexpectedly. The imagination often wandered after dark. Yet the occurrences continued.
Night after night.
The atmosphere itself seemed quietly unsettled. Then came the dreams. Many versions of the legend describe Eamon waking suddenly before dawn.
He believed someone stood beside his bed,
watching silently.
When he looked carefully, the room appeared empty.
Only moonlight rested across the floor. The silence returned.
He convinced himself he had imagined everything.
The following evening the feeling returned.
Then another. Then another. Whether Oiwa truly appeared before him or whether guilt itself had become impossible to escape, our story never fully explains.
Perhaps it never needed to. Japanese ghost stories often understand something deeply human. Not every haunting comes from spirits. Some come from memory, some from regret, some from choices that cannot be undone. Oiwa gradually became less a ghost and more a symbol. A reminder that betrayal leaves echoes far beyond the moment itself. Kabuki actors portrayed her with extraordinary care. Rather than relying upon loud moments of fear, they emphasized stillness. Long pauses.
Quiet footsteps. The soft glow of lantern light against empty rooms. Audiences leaned forward, listening carefully.
Sometimes silence itself became more powerful than any spoken line. Artists throughout Japan painted Oiwa differently. Some showed her standing beneath pale moonlight.
Others placed her beside paper screens gently moving in the evening breeze. Almost every image shared one quality: sadness. Not rage,
not violence. Only the quiet weight of someone whose trust had been broken. Even today, actors performing Yotsuya Kaiden often continue an old tradition. Before rehearsals begin, many visit Oiwa's shrine in Tokyo.
They offer respectful prayers.
Not from fear, but from gratitude. This story has shaped Japanese theater for generations. It deserves remembrance. Whether one believes in spirits or not, the tradition quietly continues. Perhaps that alone reveals how deeply Oiwa remains woven into Japan's cultural memory. As another evening settles across the old streets of Yotsuya, rain begins falling softly upon the rooftops. Lanterns cast warm reflections across the wet stones. The city gradually grows quiet.
A distant temple bell echoes once through the night. Somewhere behind a gently closed paper door, a single candle flickers.
Its flame bends slightly, though no breeze can be felt. The room remains silent.
The streets remain empty.
Only the quiet memory of an old promise lingers, waiting patiently, like so many stories that refuse to disappear with the passing of time.
If you had earned your living upon the waters of Japan's inland sea, you would have quickly learned that the ocean possessed two very different faces.
By day it was generous.
Fishing boats drifted peacefully between quiet islands.
Seabirds circled high above the waves. The wind carried the scent of salt and pine from distant shores. Children waited patiently upon wooden docks for their fathers to return before sunset. Life followed the rhythm of the tides, yet after darkness settled across the water everything changed. The islands became little more than shadows. The shoreline disappeared into mist. The sea itself seemed to stretch endlessly beneath the stars. It was during these calm nights when the wind fell silent that sailors sometimes spoke of another vessel quietly crossing the water.
A boat with no sound of oars.
No voices aboard, only a single lantern glowing softly against the darkness. For centuries this became one of the inland sea's most enduring ghost stories. Unlike tales of storms or sea monsters, the ghost boat inspired neither panic nor terror.
It inspired caution, respect,
and quiet reflection. Japan's inland sea has connected communities for thousands of years. Its waters are protected by hundreds of islands.
The currents are usually gentle.
Travel between villages became possible long before roads connected the mountains.
Merchants carried rice, pottery, silk.
Pilgrims crossed toward distant temples.
Fishermen knew every rocky shoreline by memory.
Generation after generation, the sea became another kind of road. Yet even familiar roads sometimes hold mysteries. Old fishermen often described evenings when an unusual fog appeared. Not thick enough to hide the stars, only enough to soften the horizon. The sea became perfectly smooth. Every sound seemed strangely distant. The splash of water against the boat grew quieter. Even the wind appeared to pause. Then far ahead lanterns slowly emerged. Small at first, barely brighter than a single star.
Yet with every passing moment it drifted closer.
The boat carrying it always appeared old, its wood darkened by countless seasons upon the sea. No sail caught the wind, no oars disturbed the water. Still it moved,
calmly, steadily,
as though guided by the tide alone.
Most sailors called out politely. It was customary to greet another vessel,
especially during the night.
Yet no reply ever came.
Only silence.
The lantern continued glowing softly. Some believed the boat carried fishermen who had never returned home.
Others said it belonged to travelers lost during sudden storms many years before.
A few quietly wondered whether the sea itself simply remembered every journey that had ever crossed its surface.
No explanation ever became the accepted one. Perhaps that was why the story survived. Many villages developed their own traditions regarding the mysterious boat. Some captains lowered their heads respectfully as it passed.
Others avoided rowing toward the lantern, not because they feared it, but because certain journeys were believed to belong only to those who had already completed their lives upon the water.
The oldest storytellers often emphasized something unusual.
No one who behaved respectfully ever came to harm. The ghost boat did not chase ships.
It did not overturn them. It simply continued its endless voyage across the moonlit sea. Those who quietly allowed it to pass always returned safely home. The story became less about ghosts and more about humility. The sea belonged to everyone, and to no one. Human beings merely borrowed its pathways for a little while. There's something deeply peaceful about this idea. Not every ghost story ends in tragedy. Some simply remind us that memory continues flowing quietly alongside the living.
Perhaps every sea carries echoes of those who once sailed upon it. Japanese artists occasionally painted lonely boats disappearing into pale morning mist. Tiny lanterns reflected upon perfectly still water.
No figures visible aboard, only the suggestion that someone somewhere continued another quiet journey beyond ordinary sight. Even today, fishermen who leave before sunrise often describe moments when the ocean feels suspended between two worlds. The horizon disappears. Fog drifts silently across the water. The first light of dawn has not yet arrived. Everything feels wonderfully still. Standing there, it becomes easy to understand how generations before imagined another vessel sharing the sea, not threatening, not lost, simply traveling toward a destination beyond the reach of ordinary maps.
As midnight settles across the inland sea, the final lights of distant villages slowly disappear behind the islands.
The water reflects countless stars. A lone fishing boat rocks gently with the tide. Far across the silent waves a small lantern appears. Its warm light barely touches the darkness surrounding it. No sound reaches the waiting sailor, only the quiet rhythm of the sea. The lantern drifts slowly past,
never turning,
never stopping, continuing patiently toward the unseen horizon. And long after its gentle light has vanished into the mist, the ocean remains peaceful once more, as though the quiet visitor had never been there at all.
If you had traveled the old roads of Japan during the final days of summer, you would have noticed that willow trees were rarely planted by accident.
They stood beside rivers, along quiet canals, near ancient bridges where travelers paused before continuing their journey. Their long branches swayed gently with the evening breeze,
almost as though they were bowing toward the flowing water below.
For centuries, people admired their quiet beauty.
Yet they also believed the willow carried another quality. It remembered, perhaps because its branches seemed to reach endlessly toward the earth, or because it flourished beside places where reflections blurred the boundary between sky and water. The willow gradually became linked with spirits.
Among the oldest of these stories was the tale of the woman beneath the willow.
Unlike many ghosts, she possessed no frightening appearance. No terrifying cry echoed through the night.
Those who claimed to have seen her described someone remarkably ordinary. A young woman, dressed in pale robes, standing quietly beneath the branches of an old willow tree. Her eyes remained fixed upon the river, as though patiently waiting for someone who had promised to return. The story existed in many villages. Each remembered it differently.
Some believed she had once been the daughter of a ferryman.
Others spoke of a merchant's wife. A few claimed she had belonged to an old samurai family. Her name changed. Her home changed. Even the century in which she had lived slowly shifted as generations retold the tale. Only one detail remained unchanged.
Every evening she returned to the willow.
Always waiting. Always watching the water. Long before bridges crossed every river, travel often depended upon small wooden ferries. Boatmen carried travelers from one shore to another.
Most crossings lasted only a few minutes.
Yet during storms the river could become dangerous. Heavy rain transformed gentle currents into powerful torrents. Many lives were quietly claimed by water that appeared calm only hours before. Perhaps stories such as these were born from those uncertain crossings.
One old legend tells of a young scholar traveling toward Kyoto. As sunset approached, he reached a narrow river. The ferryman had already returned home.
There would be no crossing until morning.
Accepting his delay, the traveler settled beneath a nearby willow tree to rest.
The evening air grew pleasantly cool. Fireflies drifted above the reeds.
The river reflected the first stars appearing overhead. Then he noticed someone standing only a short distance away.
A young woman, silent,
watching the current. The scholar greeted her politely. She returned the bow.
Her voice remained soft, almost difficult to hear above the gentle movement of water. They spoke for a little while.
About the weather, the river, the journey toward Kyoto.
Nothing seemed unusual. Eventually the woman smiled faintly.
She thanked him for the conversation, then quietly walked toward the willow tree.
As the scholar watched, she disappeared among the hanging branches. Thinking she had simply continued home, he paid little attention. The following morning the ferryman arrived before sunrise. While preparing the boat, the scholar casually mentioned meeting the young woman beneath the willow.
The old ferryman stopped rowing. His expression became thoughtful. After a long silence, he quietly explained that many years earlier a young woman had drowned while waiting for someone beside that very tree.
Since then, travelers occasionally spoke of meeting her during quiet summer evenings. Always kind, always patient, always disappearing before dawn.
The scholar looked back toward the willow.
Its branches moved gently in the morning breeze.
Nothing else disturbed the peaceful riverbank. Whether he had truly met a ghost or simply become part of another old story, he never knew.
Japanese ghost stories often leave such questions unanswered. Perhaps certainty would only diminish the quiet beauty. The woman beneath the willow became less a spirit of fear and more a symbol of waiting. How many people throughout history have waited beside rivers, harbors, roads, or station platforms hoping to see someone return? The story quietly suggests that love, like memory, sometimes lingers longer than time itself. Artists frequently painted willow trees bending gracefully above still water. Often a single pale figure stood almost hidden among the branches. The paintings rarely emphasized the ghost.
Instead, they celebrated the peaceful landscape. The willow itself became the heart of the image. Its quiet elegance reflected the mood of the story far better than any dramatic apparition could.
Even today, old willow trees continue growing beside rivers throughout Japan. Visitors pause beneath their shade during warm afternoons. Photographers admire their reflections upon calm water. Most see only another beautiful tree, yet those familiar with the old stories sometimes linger a little longer, listening to the breeze moving softly through the leaves, wondering whether generations before heard the very same sound.
As another summer evening settles across the river, the ferryman ties his small boat to the wooden dock.
The final travelers make their way home. Fireflies begin drifting above the water once again. The willow lowers its long branches toward the quiet current. There, standing beneath its gentle shade, a young woman watches the river.
Patiently, peacefully.
The stars slowly appear one by one above her. The current continues its endless journey toward the sea, and somewhere, perhaps just beyond the reach of memory, someone is still making their way home. If you had traveled through the mountains near Lake Biwa many centuries ago, you would have eventually heard it. Not the voices of monks, nor the footsteps of pilgrims climbing the old stone paths,
but a single temple bell.
Its deep tone rolled gently across the hills, over the quiet waters of the lake, through cedar forests that had stood for centuries,
across villages preparing for another peaceful evening.
For generations, the great bells of Japan marked the passing of time. They welcomed the dawn, announced ceremonies, comforted the grieving,
called monks to prayer,
and reminded everyone that another day had quietly come to an end. Yet among all the famous bells throughout Japan, few gathered as many stories as the Bell of Mii-dera. The temple itself rests near the southern shores of Lake Biwa. Founded more than 1,000 years ago, it became one of Japan's most respected Buddhist temples. Pilgrims traveled from distant provinces simply to pray within its quiet halls.
Monks devoted their lives to study.
The gardens changed gently with every season. Cherry blossoms welcomed the spring. Maple leaves painted the autumn hills. Winter covered the stone lanterns with fresh snow. Peace seemed to linger naturally among the old wooden buildings. Yet one object quietly became more famous than the temple itself.
Its bell, large enough that several people were needed to ring it.
Cast from bronze generations earlier, its voice could be heard across great distances. People often said the bell possessed an unusually beautiful tone.
Soft, deep,
lingering long after the final strike.
Many believed no other bell in Japan sounded quite the same.
Perhaps because its voice became so familiar, stories naturally began surrounding it.
The most famous tells of a powerful warrior monk named Benkei. His name appears throughout Japanese folklore.
Strong beyond imagination,
loyal to those he respected, and remembered for accomplishing feats that ordinary people considered impossible. One evening, according to the legend, Benkei visited Mii-dera. Upon hearing the remarkable sound of the temple bell, he decided that such a treasure belonged elsewhere. With astonishing strength, he lifted the enormous bronze bell onto his shoulders,
then began carrying it across the mountains.
The journey itself became legendary.
Villagers watched in amazement. Pilgrims stepped aside. The great bell continued moving slowly through forests and valleys.
Eventually, Benkei reached another great temple. Satisfied, he lowered the bell into its new home.
The monks gathered eagerly. At last they would hear the beautiful voice that had become famous throughout the land.
The bell was struck.
Its deep sound echoed across the courtyard. Then, according to the old story, something extraordinary happened.
The bell cried out,
not with words but with its voice, returning again and again to the same longing.
Mii-dera, as though it wished to return to the place it had called home for so many centuries.
The monks listened in silence.
Even Benkei himself, the story says, gradually understood.
Some things cannot truly be taken, not because they are too heavy, but because they belong where history has placed them.
Eventually the bell was returned,
once again hanging peacefully within Mii-dera.
Its familiar voice echoed across Lake Biwa.
Exactly where generations expected to hear it. Whether the story truly happened has never mattered very much.
Its lesson remained far more important than its history.
Objects carry memories. Places shape identity. A temple bell is more than bronze. It becomes part of the landscape itself. Its sound belongs to everyone who has ever paused to listen. Over time, another quieter belief began growing around the bell.
Some visitors claimed that during especially peaceful evenings after the final prayer had ended, the bell occasionally seemed to ring one last time, very softly, though no monk stood nearby.
Perhaps only the wind moved gently through the mountains. Perhaps distant echoes returned across the lake. Or perhaps the temple simply remembered the countless hands that had rung the bell across the centuries. Japanese ghost stories often embrace such uncertainty. Not every unexplained sound requires a spirit. Sometimes the mystery itself becomes enough.
Standing within an old temple after sunset, listening to deep bells roll across quiet hills, almost anyone can understand how earlier generations allowed imagination to gently fill the silence.
Even today, visitors to Mii-dera often pause before the great bell. Its surface bears the marks of countless seasons. Rain,
snow,
summer heat,
the touch of time itself.
When it rings, the sound remains remarkably calm.
It never rushes.
It never startles. Instead, it slowly spreads across the surrounding mountains before fading quietly into the distance. As evening settles over Lake Biwa, mist begins rising gently from the water. The temple gardens fall silent. The last visitors make their way home beneath rows of ancient cedar trees. A monk offers one final strike upon the great bell.
Its voice rolls peacefully across the lake,
across the hills,
across the centuries.
Long after the sound itself has disappeared, the quiet remains, and somewhere within that silence it almost feels as though another distant bell softly answers in return, carrying one more forgotten story into the peaceful night.
If you had traveled the mountain roads of old Japan, you quickly learned one important lesson. Never underestimate the distance between villages.
A journey that seemed simple beneath the morning sun could become surprisingly difficult before nightfall.
Mountain weather changed without warning.
Mist drifted through cedar forests. Rain transformed narrow paths into slippery trails. The setting sun disappeared behind the peaks far earlier than expected. For travelers, the sight of an inn was always welcome.
A warm meal,
a dry place to sleep,
the gentle glow of lanterns after a long day upon the road.
These small comforts often meant the difference between continuing safely or becoming lost among unfamiliar mountains. Yet among the many roadside inns that once welcomed weary travelers, there was one spoken of only in quiet voices, an inn that appeared only when it was needed most, and vanished before morning. Its story has survived for centuries, not because anyone feared it, but because no one could ever fully explain it. The oldest versions begin in much the same way. A traveler is delayed. Perhaps heavy rain slows the journey.
Perhaps the mountain path proves longer than expected. Perhaps they stop too often to admire the autumn leaves glowing beneath the evening sky.
Whatever the reason, darkness arrives before the next village. The forest grows quiet. The mountain air becomes noticeably colder. Only the sound of insects remains. The traveler begins wondering whether shelter can still be found. Then far ahead a warm light appears. Small at first,
barely visible between the cedar trees.
As they continue walking, the light gradually grows brighter. Soon a traditional inn stands quietly beside the road.
Its paper lantern sways gently above the entrance.
Warm light shines through the windows. The scent of freshly prepared rice drifts into the cool evening air. Relieved, the traveler steps inside. The owner always appears remarkably kind.
Usually an elderly couple.
Their voices are calm.
Their smiles gentle. No questions seem unnecessary.
A room is prepared.
Tea is served.
A simple evening meal soon follows.
Steamed rice,
grilled fish, pickled vegetables, hot soup warming tired hands after a long journey. Nothing about the evening feels unusual. If anything, it feels unusually peaceful. The travelers often remark how deeply they sleep that night. The mountain wind becomes little more than a distant whisper beyond the wooden walls. Morning arrives quietly. Birdsong fills the forest. Sunlight filters gently through the paper windows. The traveler thanks the owners, pays for the meal, shoulders their belongings, and continues along the mountain road.
Hours later, upon reaching the next village, they casually mention the pleasant inn hidden among the cedars.
The villagers exchange puzzled glances. Some smile faintly, others lower their voices. Then someone quietly explains,
"There has been no inn upon that road for many years.
It closed generations ago. Some say after a great landslide. Others remember a fire. A few insist the elderly owners passed away peacefully long ago. Yet every few years another traveler arrives with exactly the same story.
The warm meal, the kind hosts, the peaceful night's sleep.
No one ever agrees upon every detail. Yet somehow the feeling remains identical.
Not frightening,
simply comforting. Many scholars believe stories like these reflected the kindness shown to strangers throughout rural Japan. Travel could be dangerous. Villages often welcomed exhausted travelers with remarkable generosity. Perhaps as those old inns disappear, people continued remembering the comfort they once offered. Memory gradually became legend. Legend quietly became folklore. The ghostly inn no longer represented death.
It represented hospitality.
A place where weary souls could still find rest.
Even if only for one peaceful night.
There is something deeply reassuring about that thought. Not every ghost story asks us to fear what lies beyond ordinary understanding.
Some ask us to believe that kindness itself may leave lasting echoes.
That a warm meal shared long ago may continue nourishing travelers in ways impossible to measure.
Artists occasionally painted lonely mountain inns surrounded by towering cedar forests.
Lantern light spilled gently across damp stone paths. Mist curled softly around the rooftops. No figures appeared within the paintings.
Yet the buildings somehow felt lived in, as though someone had only stepped away for a moment and would soon return carrying another pot of freshly brewed tea.
Even today, Japan's mountain roads still wind through forests much as they always have. Small inns continue welcoming travelers. Many have remained within the same family for generations. Their wooden floors creak softly beneath familiar footsteps. Their gardens change gently with every season. Standing outside one during a quiet evening, it becomes easy to imagine how the old stories first began.
As another traveler reaches the highest point of the mountain pass, the last colors of sunset disappear behind distant peaks.
The road ahead grows difficult to see. The forest settles into silence. Then far beyond the trees a single paper lantern begins glowing warmly. Its gentle light welcomes another weary traveler home. The inn waits patiently beside the road, its door already open, its kettle quietly steaming over the fire. And somewhere beyond the reach of time itself, its kind owners are still preparing one more peaceful evening for anyone who arrives before the night grows too dark. If you had crossed the mountain passes of Japan before sunrise, you would have discovered a world unlike any other. The forests had not yet awakened. The birds remained silent. The valleys disappeared beneath a blanket of pale mist. Even the tallest cedar trees seemed to float above a sea of clouds. For a little while the mountains belonged neither to night nor to day.
They rested quietly between both.
It was during these peaceful hours that travelers sometimes spoke of meeting a lone bride.
She wore a pure white kimono.
Her long sleeves moved gently with the morning breeze. A traditional bridal hood covered her dark hair.
Her footsteps made almost no sound upon the old mountain road. She never hurried. She never called for help.
She simply walked slowly through the mist as though following a path only she could see. The story became known throughout many mountain villages. People called her the Bride of the Mist. Unlike many ghost stories, no one remembered her with fear, only with quiet sympathy. Marriage in old Japan was often more than a celebration. It marked the beginning of an entirely new life. Young women sometimes left the villages where they had spent their childhood,
crossing mountains, rivers, and forests to join families they had never truly known. These journeys could last many days. The roads were narrow, the weather unpredictable.
Travelers depended upon guides, small roadside inns, and the kindness of strangers. Most journeys ended happily, yet not all. Old records tell of sudden storms, mountain landslides, flooded rivers, heavy snow arriving earlier than expected. Nature often decided whether a traveler reached the next village before nightfall. Perhaps from these uncertainties the legend quietly emerged.
One version tells of a wedding procession climbing a mountain road late in the autumn.
The leaves had already turned deep shades of crimson and gold. The air carried the first hint of winter.
The bride rode peacefully within a small palanquin. Her family followed close behind. The journey had nearly ended.
Only one mountain pass remained before reaching her new home. Then, without warning, a heavy mist rolled across the valley.
The road disappeared almost instantly.
Even those walking only a few steps apart struggled to see one another. The procession stopped. Voices called gently through the fog. No one wished to become separated. They waited patiently, believing the mist would soon pass. When it finally lifted, the road lay empty. The bride, the attendants nearest to her, even the small palanquin had vanished completely. Searches continued for many days. Villagers explored every nearby trail. Monks offered prayers at mountain temples.
No trace was ever found.
Years later, travelers occasionally reported seeing a lone bride walking peacefully through the morning mist. Always alone, always heading toward the same distant mountain pass.
She never looked lost,
never appeared frightened, only quietly continued a journey that somehow remained unfinished. Another version tells a gentler story. A young man traveling home before dawn noticed the bride walking ahead of him. Believing she might appreciate company along the lonely road, he politely greeted her.
She bowed in return.
They walked together for nearly an hour, speaking softly about the beauty of the mountains,
the changing seasons,
the peaceful sound of nearby streams. Eventually the mist began thinning. Sunlight slowly reached the valley below. The young woman smiled, thanked him for his kindness, then quietly stepped from the road. As the final veil of fog drifted away, she disappeared among the cedar trees. When the traveler later described the encounter to villagers, an elderly woman listened carefully, then smiled with quiet recognition. She explained that many generations earlier, bride had vanished upon that very mountain road. Since then, those who traveled with kindness in their hearts sometimes found themselves sharing part of her journey, only for a little while, only until the sun returned. Japanese folklore often allows compassion to outshine fear. The bride of the mist never seeks revenge. She never frightens those who meet her. Instead, she quietly reminds travelers that every road carries stories long forgotten by maps. Every mountain remembers those who crossed its paths. Every morning mist briefly hides another chapter of the past. Artists often painted solitary figures disappearing into pale mountain fog. The bride herself remained almost secondary. The landscape became the true subject. Towering cedars, narrow stone roads, clouds resting gently between distant peaks.
The paintings invited viewers not to search for ghosts but to appreciate the quiet beauty that allowed such stories to exist.
Even today, those who visit Japan's mountain villages before sunrise often speak of the remarkable stillness. Mist fills the valleys.
Temple bells echo softly across unseen hills.
The world feels wonderfully suspended between dream and waking. Standing there watching the first sunlight slowly dissolve the morning fog, it becomes surprisingly easy to imagine another traveler walking just beyond sight.
Not frightening,
not sorrowful, simply continuing an old journey with endless patience. As dawn quietly approaches, the mountain road begins revealing itself once more. The mist grows thinner. The cedar forests brighten beneath the rising sun. Birdsong returns to the valleys. For a brief moment, far ahead, a figure dressed in white pauses upon the winding path. She looks toward the distant mountains, offers the smallest bow, then continues onward.
With every gentle step she fades into the morning light, leaving behind only silence and another peaceful story carried softly through the mountains of old Japan. If you had asked travelers many centuries ago which forest they feared becoming lost within, many would have quietly spoken the same name,
Aokigahara.
Long before it became known to the modern world, it was simply another ancient forest resting at the foot of Mount Fuji.
A place where towering trees grew so closely together that sunlight struggled to reach the moss below. The air remained cool even during summer. The wind rarely traveled far beneath the dense canopy,
and footsteps upon the soft forest floor seemed to disappear almost as soon as they were made.
For generations, people believed the forest possessed an unusual silence. Not an empty silence, but one that seemed quietly alive. The songs of birds became less frequent. Branches absorbed distant sounds. Even one's own breathing felt strangely louder than before. It was easy to understand why stories eventually took root beneath those ancient trees. Among the oldest was the tale of a wandering lantern.
Unlike many ghost stories, this one never spoke of monsters,
nor of angry spirits waiting in the darkness.
Instead, it told of a single light, small, warm, patient,
appearing only to those who had lost their way. The oldest versions begin with a traveler crossing the forests surrounding Mount Fuji before autumn sunset. The day had been pleasant. The mountain stood proudly against a cloudless sky.
The path seemed clear.
Every turn looked familiar, until, without realizing exactly when, the traveler noticed something unsettling. The trail had disappeared. Looking behind offered no comfort. Every direction appeared identical. Towering trees surrounded the forest floor, their roots twisted across thick blankets of emerald moss. Volcanic stone rested quietly beneath ferns that had grown undisturbed for generations. Nothing appeared dangerous, yet nothing offered guidance either. The traveler continued walking,
carefully, patiently, believing the path would surely return.
Instead, the forest only grew quieter. Time itself became difficult to measure beneath the dense branches. Then far ahead a warm light appeared.
Not bright,
not dazzling, only the gentle glow of an old paper lantern. It moved slowly between the trees, sometimes visible, sometimes hidden behind the trunks of ancient cedars.
The traveler called out. No answer came.
Still the lantern continued moving, always just far enough ahead to remain out of reach. Many stories say the traveler eventually chose to follow, not because of desperation, but because the warm light felt strangely comforting. The forest no longer seemed quite so lonely. For what felt like hours, the lantern quietly guided the way, across narrow streams, past enormous lava stones covered in thick moss,
beneath fallen trees that had rested upon the forest floor for decades.
The traveler never once caught sight of the person carrying it, only the lantern itself, floating gently through the silence. Then quite suddenly the forest ended.
The traveler stepped onto a familiar mountain road. The first stars had only just begun appearing overhead. Turning back, the lantern had vanished.
Only darkness remained beneath the trees. Villagers listening to such stories often smiled quietly.
Some believed the lantern belonged to an old woodcutter who continued helping strangers long after his own lifetime had ended.
Others spoke of forgotten monks who once wandered the forests around Mount Fuji.
A few insisted the mountain itself watched over respectful travelers.
No single explanation became accepted. Perhaps the mystery was always more beautiful than certainty. Aokigahara has inspired stories for hundreds of years. Its volcanic landscape is unlike almost anywhere else in Japan.
The ground itself was formed by ancient eruptions of Mount Fuji.
Trees grew slowly upon hardened lava. Roots twisted around black volcanic rock instead of sinking deeply into soil. Even today, walking through the forest feels unlike walking anywhere else. The moss softens every footstep. The trees stand remarkably still. The world grows wonderfully quiet. Japanese storytellers rarely portrayed the forest as evil. Instead, they described it as ancient, a place deserving respect, a landscape where people naturally became more aware of themselves. Perhaps that quiet encouraged imagination, or perhaps silence simply allowed older stories to be heard more clearly. Artists often painted forests surrounding Mount Fuji beneath pale moonlight. Tiny lanterns appeared almost hidden among the distant trees. Viewers could never quite tell whether someone truly carried them or whether the light belonged to the forest itself. That uncertainty became part of the beauty. Even now, visitors walking the marked trails of Aokigahara often speak about its extraordinary calmness.
The forest muffles sound in ways that feel almost impossible.
Standing there surrounded by ancient cedar and hemlock listening only to the gentle movement of leaves high above one, begins understanding why generations before imagined quiet spirits sharing these woods, not to frighten travelers, but to gently remind them that every ancient forest carries memories older than any map.
As evening slowly settles around Mount Fuji, the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the great mountain.
Shadows stretch across the moss-covered ground. The forest grows wonderfully still. Then far between the trees a single lantern begins glowing. Its warm light drifts patiently through the ancient woods.
Never hurried,
never fading.
Quietly waiting for the next weary traveler who may one day need help finding the way home. If you had climbed the stone steps of a mountain temple at dusk, you might have believed you were leaving the ordinary world behind.
The sounds of nearby villages slowly faded. The laughter of children disappeared into the valleys below. Only the quiet rustle of cedar branches and the occasional song of distant birds remained. Temples were often built high above towns for a reason.
The climb itself became part of the journey.
Each step carried visitors a little farther from the noise of everyday life,
and a little closer to silence.
Among the countless temples scattered throughout Japan, there are many stories of monks whose devotion became so complete that even death could not persuade them to leave.
One such story tells of an elderly monk remembered not for miracles nor for great teachings, but for a promise.
A promise he intended to keep no matter how many years passed.
The temple where he lived stood deep within the mountains.
It was neither wealthy nor famous. Only a handful of monks cared for its gardens.
Pilgrims occasionally arrived to offer prayers.
Travelers rested there before continuing over the nearby mountain pass.
Life unfolded peacefully. The old monk greeted everyone with the same gentle smile. He swept fallen leaves each morning,
prepared tea for weary visitors, lit the lanterns before sunset, and every evening just before darkness settled across the forest he rang the temple bell. Its voice drifted slowly through the valley. The surrounding villages soon came to expect that familiar sound. Farmers paused their work.
Children knew it was time to return home.
Families quietly gathered for the evening meal. The bell became part of daily life.
As dependable as the setting sun, years became decades. The old monk gradually grew slower. His hair turned white. His hands carried the marks of countless winters. Yet every evening without fail the bell continued ringing. One autumn the monks noticed he had become unusually weak. Even climbing the temple steps left him short of breath.
The younger monks offered to ring the bell instead.
The old man smiled kindly,
then gently declined. "It has always been my duty,"
he simply replied,
"and until I no longer can, I will continue."
One quiet evening, as maple leaves covered the stone paths in brilliant shades of crimson, the bell rang exactly as it always had. Deep, calm, peaceful.
The monks gathered for their evening prayers. When the ceremony ended, they discovered the old monk resting peacefully beside the great bell.
He had quietly passed away.
The temple mourned. Visitors traveled from nearby villages to pay their respects. The younger monks prepared to continue the evening tradition themselves.
The following night they climbed the bell tower before sunset.
Just as they reached the rope, the great bell rang.
Once,
perfectly. No one had touched it. The sound rolled gently across the valley exactly as it always had. The monks looked at one another. Perhaps the wind had moved the bell. They thought little more of it.
The next evening it happened again.
Always at precisely the same time.
One peaceful strike.
Never more.
Never less.
The villagers below continued hearing the familiar sound. Many assumed the temple had simply continued its daily routine. Only the monks knew something extraordinary had quietly begun. This continued for many evenings.
No matter who watched the bell.
No matter who waited beside it. The single evening chime always came without anyone pulling the rope. Eventually an elderly pilgrim visited the temple.
After listening quietly to the story, he smiled.
"There is nothing to fear,"
he said softly. "Some promises are stronger than time."
The old monk simply wishes to finish his evening duties. The monks never attempted to explain the mystery again.
Instead, they quietly bowed toward the bell each evening before sunset, then waited.
Soon enough, the familiar voice echoed across the mountains once more. Years later, the mysterious ringing gradually ceased.
Some believed the monk had finally found peace. Others wondered whether another guardian had quietly taken over the temple's evening prayers.
No one ever claimed certainty.
Perhaps certainty was never the purpose of the story. Japanese ghost tales often celebrate devotion rather than fear. The old monk harmed no one. He frightened no traveler.
He simply continued doing what he had always done, keeping one small promise until it no longer needed keeping. Even today, mountain temples across Japan continue ringing their bells at sunset.
The sound travels remarkable distances through cool evening air.
It is impossible not to pause for a moment while listening. The deep notes seem to linger among the cedar forests long after the bell itself has fallen silent. Standing there watching the last light disappear beyond the mountains, it becomes easy to imagine another quiet figure making one final walk toward the bell tower.
Not because anyone asked him to, not because anyone expected him to,
but because some acts of kindness repeated faithfully over many years become part of the place itself. As evening settles gently across the mountains, the temple gardens grow still. Mist begins rising from the valleys below. The final visitors descend the ancient stone steps toward home. Above them, the great bronze bell waits patiently beneath the wooden roof. The sky darkens. The first stars appear.
Then, without haste, without hands, the bell sounds once.
Its peaceful voice drifts across the forests, across distant villages,
across another quiet evening in old Japan.
And somewhere beyond the reach of ordinary memory, an old monk smiles gently, knowing that another day has ended exactly as it should.
If you had walked the great Tōkaidō road during Japan's Edo period, you would never have truly walked alone.
The road stretched for nearly 500 kilometers, connecting the great city of Edo with the ancient capital of Kyoto. Every day thousands of people followed its winding path.
Samurai carried official messages between provinces.
Merchants transported silk and tea.
Pilgrims journeyed toward distant shrines.
Artists searched for inspiration beneath Mount Fuji. Families traveled to reunite with loved ones they had not seen for many years. The Tōkaidō became more than a road. It became the beating heart of Japan. Its post towns welcomed strangers. Its bridges carried countless footsteps. Its inns became temporary homes for those forever moving toward another destination.
Yet, as peaceful as the road often appeared, there were nights when travelers spoke of meeting someone who never seemed to arrive anywhere at all. They called him the last passenger.
Unlike many ghosts, no one remembered his face clearly. Some believed he was young.
Others insisted he had already grown old. His clothing changed depending upon who told the story.
Only one detail remained remarkably consistent.
He always walked alone.
Always carried a small paper lantern.
And always traveled after everyone else had already gone.
The first stories began appearing during the late Edo period.
A merchant finishing business in one post town would leave just a little later than expected.
The afternoon sun slipped behind distant mountains.
The road gradually emptied.
Soon only the sound of sandals against packed earth remained. Then far ahead another traveler appeared.
He walked calmly, never hurried, never stopped.
always maintaining the same quiet pace.
The merchant naturally assumed they would eventually catch up, yet no matter how long they continued walking, the distance between them never seemed to change. Sometimes the lantern disappeared briefly behind a curve in the road.
The merchant quickened their pace, only to find the traveler waiting patiently farther ahead.
Never closer,
never farther away, simply always there.
One evening, according to an old tale, a young doctor found himself delayed while visiting patients in a mountain village.
Darkness arrived before he reached the next post station.
Fortunately, another traveler appeared ahead carrying a lantern.
Relieved to have company, the doctor followed. The stranger seemed to know every turn, every bridge, every narrow path through the surrounding forests.
Hours passed peacefully. The doctor occasionally called out polite greetings.
The traveler never replied.
Eventually, the warm lights of a post town appeared in the distance.
As the doctor crossed the final bridge, he looked ahead to thank the mysterious guide. The road stood empty.
The lantern had vanished.
The following morning, he mentioned the unusual encounter to the elderly innkeeper.
The old man smiled quietly,
then nodded.
"You are not the first," he said.
"Many travelers have spoken of him. They always reach home safely. No one ever learns where he is going."
Over generations, the story gradually changed. Some believed the last passenger had once been a courier who spent his entire life upon the Tōkaidō. Others imagined a pilgrim who never completed his final journey.
A few suggested he represented every traveler who had ever walked those ancient roads. Perhaps the road itself had simply remembered their footsteps. There is something quietly comforting about such an idea. Great roads witness countless human lives, joyful departures, tearful farewells,
ordinary mornings, unexpected reunions. Every stone remembers another story.
Perhaps old roads deserve legends of their own. The Tōkaidō itself became famous through paintings.
Artists captured travelers crossing snowy mountain passes,
resting beside rivers, watching Mount Fuji rise beyond distant fields.
Their work celebrated not destinations, but the journey itself.
Perhaps that explains why the last passenger remains such a peaceful ghost.
He never asks anyone to follow. He never leads travelers astray. He simply continues walking,
one quiet step after another, as though every road still holds another destination waiting somewhere beyond the next hill. Even today, small sections of the original Tōkaidō remain. Stone paths wind gently between ancient cedar trees. Old milestone markers still stand beside forgotten roads. Historic inns continue welcoming visitors much as they did centuries ago. Walking those paths, it becomes remarkably easy to imagine another traveler just beyond sight, not because the place feels haunted, but because it feels remembered. As night settles across the old highway, the final inn closes its wooden shutters. Lanterns glow softly beneath the eaves.
Crickets begin their evening song.
The road stretches quietly toward the distant mountains. Far ahead, a single lantern moves steadily through the darkness. Its light never grows brighter, never grows dimmer, only continuing onward with endless patience, toward another village,
another bridge, another peaceful evening beneath the stars.
And somewhere long after every other traveler has reached home, the last passenger quietly continues his journey walking the ancient road, one gentle step.
If you had wandered through the countryside of old Japan, there was one comforting sight every traveler hoped to find before nightfall. A lantern, not the bright lights of a great city nor the countless lamps of a bustling market.
Only a single paper lantern hanging quietly beneath the wooden eaves of a country home.
It meant warmth. It meant shelter.
It meant that someone was still awake, waiting for whoever might arrive before the road disappeared into darkness.
For centuries, hospitality was among the greatest virtues in rural Japan.
A stranger was rarely left without food. A weary traveler seldom turned away.
Even the smallest farmhouse often offered tea, a bowl of rice, or simply a warm place beside the hearth until morning came.
Yet among these countless homes, there was one remembered differently from all the others. People called it the house where the lanterns never went out. No one agreed exactly where it stood. Some placed it beside an old mountain road. Others believed it rested near the edge of a cedar forest. A few insisted it overlooked quiet rice fields stretching toward distant hills. The location always changed. The feeling never did. It appeared only to travelers who had become completely exhausted, those who had walked farther than they should, those caught unexpectedly by heavy rain, those who quietly wondered whether they might spend the night beneath the open sky. Then somewhere ahead a warm lantern appeared. Its gentle light shone through the darkness, steady, inviting, peaceful. As the traveler approached, a modest wooden house slowly emerged from the night. Nothing about it seemed remarkable. A carefully swept garden, a stone path leading toward the entrance, a kettle quietly steaming above a charcoal fire. An elderly woman always answered the door. She greeted every visitor with the same gentle smile, as though she had been expecting them all along. No questions were asked, no payment requested. She simply welcomed them inside. The warmth of the hearth filled the room. Tea was prepared. Rice was served. Sometimes grilled river fish, sometimes fresh vegetables gathered from the nearby hills. The meal always felt strangely familiar, as though the traveler had returned home after many years away. Conversation remained quiet. The old woman rarely spoke of herself. Instead, she listened. Travelers shared stories of distant provinces, of families waiting beyond the mountains, of temples visited during long pilgrimages. She nodded gently, smiled often, and always encouraged them to rest before continuing their journey. That night, without exception, every traveler slept deeply. The worries carried upon the road quietly disappeared. Morning arrived with birdsong drifting through open windows. The woman had already prepared breakfast. After expressing heartfelt thanks, the traveler continued onward. The journey somehow felt lighter than before. Days later, the story usually found its way into conversation. Perhaps at another inn, perhaps beside a temple, perhaps while sharing tea with local villagers. Someone would mention the kindly woman living alone beside the old road. The villagers would exchange thoughtful glances. Then one elder would quietly answer, "There is no house there, not anymore." Many years earlier, they explained, a widow had indeed lived upon that very road. Her husband had been a traveler himself. He spent much of his life journeying across Japan. After his passage, she continued welcoming strangers exactly as they had always done together. No traveler ever left hungry. No traveler ever slept outside while her lantern still burned. Eventually, the old woman passed away peacefully. The house slowly disappeared. Time reclaimed the garden. The roof collapsed. The forest quietly returned. Yet every few years another weary traveler described spending the night there. Always the same house. Always the same warm meal. Always the same gentle smile waiting beside the hearth. No one ever spoke of fear. Only gratitude. Perhaps some acts of kindness become so deeply rooted within a place that even time cannot erase them completely. Japanese ghost stories often celebrate such quiet generosity. Not every spirit remains because of sorrow. Some remain because love itself leaves lasting traces. The old woman asked for nothing, expected nothing. She simply continued offering comfort to those who needed it most. Long after the ordinary world believed she had gone. Even today, driving through the countryside of Japan after sunset, you will often see warm lanterns glowing outside traditional homes and small inns. Each one quietly promises safety, rest, and welcome. Perhaps that simple tradition has always carried something deeper. A reminder that kindness once freely given may continue guiding others long after we ourselves have finished our own journey. As another peaceful evening settles across the mountains, the final colors of sunset disappear beyond the distant hills. The road grows quiet. Crickets begin their familiar song. Far ahead, a single lantern glows warmly beneath the wooden eaves of a small country house. Its light never flickers, never fades, patiently waiting for one more traveler who has walked just a little farther than expected. Inside, a kettle begins to softly whistle above the fire. Another bowl of rice is quietly prepared. Another place beside the hearth remains waiting. And throughout the long, peaceful night, the lantern continues burning gently, just as it always has for anyone still searching for the way home.
If you had traveled the old mountain roads of Japan during late autumn, the villagers would often offer one simple piece of advice: begin your journey early.
Not because the roads were dangerous, nor because wild animals wandered the forests after sunset, but because the mountains possessed a habit of hiding themselves. As afternoons slowly faded, mist would gather quietly between the valleys.
At first it appeared as little more than pale ribbons drifting through the cedar trees.
Then, without anyone noticing exactly when, entire hillsides disappeared. The familiar road became unfamiliar. The next bend in the path seemed farther away than before. The mountains entered another world.
It was during these quiet evenings that travelers occasionally spoke of discovering a village no map had ever recorded. The story was known by many names.
Some called it the village beyond the mist. Others simply remembered it as the village that returned.
Unlike many ghost stories, there was no curse.
No restless spirit waiting beneath the trees. Only a peaceful village that seemed to exist somewhere between memory and time.
The oldest versions tell of a woodcutter returning home later than usual. Autumn had painted the mountains in deep shades of crimson and gold.
The day had passed pleasantly.
He had gathered more firewood than expected. By the time he began the walk home, the first wisps of mist had already begun drifting through the valley. He knew these mountains well.
Every path, every stream, every ancient cedar. Yet that evening something felt different. The trail seemed longer, the silence deeper.
The forest almost too still. Then far ahead he noticed warm light. Not one lantern, many.
Tiny golden lights glowing softly through the white mist. Curious, he continued walking. Slowly the outlines of wooden houses appeared. Smoke drifted lazily from their chimneys. Children laughed somewhere beyond a narrow lane. Someone struck a temple bell in the distance. The village felt wonderfully alive. An elderly woman welcomed him with a smile.
"You must be tired," she said softly. "You've walked a long way."
The woodcutter accepted her invitation.
He shared a warm meal beside a charcoal fire.
Rice, fresh mountain vegetables, hot tea prepared from leaves gathered on the nearby hills.
The evening passed peacefully. Neighbors spoke kindly to one another.
Children chased one another beneath rows of glowing paper lanterns.
The village felt strangely familiar, as though he had lived there once long ago. Before sleep he asked the old woman the name of the village. She smiled gently,
then looked toward the mountains beyond the window. "We have had many names,"
she replied.
"Most have simply been forgotten." The following morning sunlight streamed gently through the paper windows.
The woodcutter thanked his hosts, gathered his belongings,
and continued down the mountain road. Only a short distance later he met another traveler.
Casually he mentioned a peaceful village hidden among the mist. The traveler frowned. "There has never been a village there," he answered.
"Only old forest." Thinking little of it, the woodcutter returned several weeks later.
He searched every nearby valley,
every narrow path, every stream crossing. Nothing, only towering cedar trees, moss-covered stones, and quiet mountain silence. Years passed. The story spread from village to village.
Every generation seemed to know someone who had spent a peaceful night in a mysterious settlement.
The details always remained remarkably similar. Warm lanterns, kind strangers,
simple food, a temple bell echoing gently through the evening mist.
No one ever reported fear, only an unusual sense of peace. Many scholars believe stories like these reflected the disappearance of countless mountain villages throughout Japanese history. As families moved toward larger towns, old settlements slowly vanished. Nature quietly reclaimed abandoned homes. Stone foundations disappeared beneath moss. Footpaths became forest once more. Only memory remained. Perhaps the village beyond the mist became a way of saying that places are never truly lost as long as someone still remembers them. There is something deeply comforting about that thought. Buildings may disappear, roads may fade, names may be forgotten, Yet kindness, shared meals, the laughter of children, sound of an evening temple bell may continue echoing quietly through generations. Even today, travelers driving through Japan's mountain regions occasionally pass villages that seem almost untouched by time. Wooden homes stand beneath towering cedars. Smoke rises gently into the cool evening air. Lanterns glow warmly outside small inns. The world feels slower there,
more patient.
Standing quietly among those mountains, one begins to understand why the old stories endured. Not because people feared the unknown, but because they hoped certain beautiful places might somehow survive forever. As the final evening settles across another ancient valley, autumn mist rises gently between the trees. The mountains slowly disappear beneath the blanket of silver cloud. Far away, a temple bell rings once. Warm lanterns begin appearing one by one through the drifting fog. Their gentle light welcomes another traveler from the lonely road. Perhaps the village has returned once more, waiting patiently exactly as it has for countless generations. And as the lanterns glow softly beneath the quiet mountain sky, our own journey through Japan's oldest ghost stories gently comes to an end. The forests grow still.
The mist drifts peacefully through the valleys.
The ancient roads continue winding toward distant mountains. And somewhere beyond the next quiet bend, another story patiently waits for the next traveler willing to listen.